I have the honor of introducing Joy Bonaguro. Joy has spent her career working at the nexus of data, technology, and design policy. She was recently appointed as Chief Data Officer of the state of California, with an overarching goal to improve government use of data. Prior to her state role, she was responsible for scaling internal data systems, data and information security at Corelight, a high-growth cybersecurity startup funded by Accel and General Catalyst. Prior to Corelight, she served as the first Chief Data Officer for the city and county of San Francisco, where she pioneered multiple initiatives to streamline data access, improve data management and governance, and boost capacity to use data through training and data science. Before that, Joy developed technology, cyber, and private policy across the Department of Energy's Natural Laboratory System. Her career started in New Orleans with 7 years designing and managing the development of information systems to support planning and decision-making for local governments and nonprofits. Joy earned her master's degree from UC Berkeley's Goldman School of Public Policy and her bachelor's in mathematics and philosophy from Tulane University. So with that, I will hand it over to Joy. And I did also want to mention, I'm hopeful that everyone is enjoying a cup of coffee right now. You should have received a Starbucks gift card from us, and that was so that we could all enjoy coffee together. Good morning, Joy. I don't know if you've got your coffee ready to go. Oh, good. Okay, water. We're always supportive of that. But anyway, thanks for being here. I did already go through your bio, so I will hand it over.
Great. Thank you, Katie. And thank you for the lovely introduction, or the parts that I heard of it. And thank you to Chris and the other organizers. And thank you to the technical staff this morning as we dealt with managing the unexpected of this presentation. And I apologize for the delay. But with that, I want to just step back and say that I am so excited to be speaking with you all today on such an important and existential topic for the state of California, and the theme of how to expect the unexpected. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. But obligatory check. Can everyone see my screen? And can folks hear me?
Yes.
Okay, if anything happens, someone flag me. I've got Tim text me, everything. I'm ready to go. I'm just gonna pull that up. With that, I'm just gonna dive in. All right, expecting the unexpected. So if you lived in the South, these kinds of images became a regular part of your life. This one was from Hurricane Katrina back in 2005. And in the days leading up to landfall, our team at the Greater New Orleans Community Data Center, we were tracking these images like hawks, right? And on Saturday, the day before Katrina landed, we started to discuss the need to estimate areas of impact if the hurricane hit and there was flooding. So I started to research elevation data, went to USGS and pulled together this map. And I had found it on USGS, but there was no metadata, right? And so I downloaded the elevation data, made this map, but then I was like, is this in feet or meters? And I did not know. And, so I had to make my best guess. So we ended up publishing this. Hurricane Katrina landed on Sunday. We published this map the next day, and we thought we had missed the brunt of the hit, as you may have known. But then the levees broke early Tuesday morning, and we saw extreme devastation and flooding. And this map, as a result, ended up being published all over the world. And then we actually used this map and some of the other analytics I did to re-estimate repopulation of New Orleans. And so this got out there. Turns out my unit guess was wrong. And someone out there in the ethernets, found it, said, hey, that's in the wrong units. I updated it. Sort of end of story. But underneath that story is a story about data readiness. And it's not just about having data ready at hand, it's also about having it well documented in the metadata. And so today, as you discuss how to expect the unexpected, I want to help frame the statewide data strategy and our efforts as ultimately a key contributor to data resiliency and the more holistic resiliency for the state of California. And if we start to think about resiliency as a feature of our data infrastructure, we can truly start to prepare ourselves for the unexpected. So one of the things we were trying to do with the statewide data effort was look for broadly shared challenges that we can address better together and where there's no existing center of activity, right? I didn't want to come in and develop a statewide data strategy and just start throwing things around because, you don't want to generate unnecessary turf wars. We don't want to just busy ourselves with busy work. We want to work on some core shared challenges, and then we want to be realistic about what's feasible in the near term. So, and ultimately to ensure that we bring the right data tools to the job. We don't want to over-engineer our data resiliency, but we also don't want to overpower it and waste resources. So the statewide data strategy is organized around 3 strategic goals that are built around the analogy that we need to equip ourselves to navigate the data landscape. In the analogy here, and I'll reference this throughout the talk, is that much like the statewide highway system, we need to engineer a data landscape that works for us. And so the first strategic goal is we need to build the data roads and streamline data access. So, in the mid-century, we built the state highway system, right? And the thing is that was coordinated across states. You don't take the I-10 from New Orleans, hit a state boundary, exit, go on a side road, and then rejoin the I-10 at a different spot. No, these roads are connected and they're part of a larger system. However, that is not the way the data worlds of the state and then our relationships with counties and local jurisdictions work. And instead, what navigating the data roads looks like is something like this. So if you know who to contact, you sort of ask them for the data, and they're sort of non-committal because data provision is not part of their job. You sort of harass them about it, and you keep going after them, and then they eventually hand it to you. But of course, you end up having questions because it's not particularly well documented or well understood. And you go into what I call the question death spiral. And the next time you have to update your analytics, your report, your dashboard, you sort of re-engineer the whole process, or re-experience, I should say. And data access is so important, and holistic data access is because if we only see part of the problem, we might solve for the wrong thing. So there's a couple key integrated data efforts that are going on in the state of California right now. One about cradle to career, you might have heard, where we're trying to integrate early childhood services with K through 12 with career outcomes, so we can actually understand what pathways are working for the residents of California, and we stop arguing about what are the pieces that matter, and we actually start to understand how the pieces interact. And so as we approach resilience, we really need to architect a spectrum of access before the crisis, right? So wherever we can, we want to use open data. That's great because it's at the ready. Of course, that data needs to be recent, updated in a predictable fashion, and well documented, and we could have a whole conversation about that. But then we need to address de-identified data where that's available. We need to have systems where we can query and ask questions without exposing the underlying data, and then we need to have systems where we can provide limited and even closed access for data with either security implications or privacy implications and these kinds of things. But this needs to be architected before the crisis, not during the crisis. I mean, we've seen a lot of that during the crisis, and it's exhausting. But we also need to step back and think about access across the full spectrum of data sources. We often focus on our own internal data that we generate and consume, but that's actually not enough. Going back to this concept of holistic data, we need to curate and collect data from other sources, whether it's the federal, whether it's other jurisdictions. We need to have that sort of data in hand. And then we also need to acquire data. So over the next several months, you will start hearing about the statewide contract for aerial imagery that was led by the water boards. And it's an incredible contract that's going to give this incredible data as a service to all entities across the state of California. But we need to make sure that we architect those spectrums of access against the spectrum of data sources, so we can look at things holistically. And we saw the importance of external data during COVID when we were relying on, mobility summary metrics from Google and Apple to understand compliance with stay-at-home orders, right? Holistic data is where we need to move. Lastly, on this topic, I want to talk about introducing the concept of data drills. So a colleague of mine, Amin, who is the Chief Data and Analytics Officer in New York City, and they had a variety of crises, and they learned that data drills actually need to be a subset of emergency preparedness. Like, we do lots of tabletop exercises and things like that, but we actually need to do data drills like, oh, this happens. Well, what data would be helpful to have on hand, right? From who? And then you can actually prepare and have that available with a lightweight playbook on how to use it. So you're not scrambling in the midst of a crisis, or you're only scrambling for new things that pop up. The next part of the strategic plan, and coming back to our analogy of building the data roads, is once we have the roads, we need to craft the rules of the roads, right? We want people to yield where it's appropriate and take more caution. We want people to stop where appropriate. We want people to know what sort of training's required. You know, if you're a freight driver versus a forklift versus just a car, you know, what does the rules of the road look like if we're going to have greater and enhanced data exchange across the state, including what are the rules around responsible and ethical use of data. And I found, when I was building this analogy, I found this amazing picture from Wikipedia of a selection of stop signs before 1968 from around the world. And then after what was the 1968 convention, where they sort of, let's move towards a standard. It was actually a standard that the US adopted after decades of contentious issues around what should a stop sign look like in the US. And I always like to ask, when would you want to drive? You get off a plane somewhere. Well, I would prefer to be driving in the time period of 1968, if only on the decision of, you know, stop sign selection. And well, the need for standards in the physical world is sort of, it has this intrinsic saliency because, you know, we don't want to die. We're less clear about that in the digital world, but the amplifications and the data amplifications are just as much. And it's really important for us to think about it that way. And so one of the challenges we uncovered as we talked with folks across the state is that we're consistently inconsistent. And so this is part of the rules of the road, right? And my favorite example is 4 vaccine signups, 4 race ethnicity options. Now, these signups come from different states, entities across the state. I'm not going to say names, but this is what I call the not included option. B is the not required option. C is the scroll forever option. I mean, this one, I don't know how many entries in there. I couldn't actually count them because the window of selection was so small, and I tried to animate a video for you all, but there must have been about 50 options to select from. And then the last one, the at a glance option. And this is my silent audience poll. Who do you think ended up having the best data? Not included, not required, scroll forever, at a glance. Well, yeah, I'm seeing some D's in the chat. We don't actually know, interestingly enough, but I have the same guess. And but more importantly, the broader issue is how this has affected statewide numbers. Is we have almost 10% of people reporting other, which means they also don't see themselves in the question. And we'll come to that in a second. But we have almost 20% of missing data, right? So. And what's funny is, like, it's not necessarily necessary that it's like this, right? Back in 2015, the census did a national content test on what's the best way to ask race and ethnicity to have the least error in your data and the highest response rates. So we actually know how to do this well, but in the absence of shared standards and approaches, we don't, or even just graceful defaults. And so I'm very interested in moving towards data standards that we start to build into our architectural principles, our contract requirements, all of that. And this is just a screenshot of work that I did in San Francisco with my colleagues there around promoting data standards and then imposing those data standards at the point of publication through the open data portal, so we could start to harmonize our data over time, even if we couldn't harmonize the backends perfectly. So another rule of the road, we talked about data sharing, but data use agreements, when you have to share and negotiate access to data that can't be easily released internally or through the public, and you have to add in a few more steps. So you, instead of sort of handing it over, it's, oh, you need to talk to so-and-so, and then we have to sign this agreement, blah, 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 and all this. And this process can take quite a long time. I've seen data use agreements average about 18 months, up to 10 years. In the meantime, the insights and the business decisions that are being underinformed by data still have to go on. And so, of course, in the same pattern, you have to repeat it when it's time for renewal. So we're breaking from what I call the DUA death spiral. We're moving from this point-to-point system to a single umbrella agreement called the Interagency Data Exchange Agreement, which sort of says, here's how we share data. And then for specific instances of data exchange, you're going to sign this brief agreement. And then we're going to combine that with an escalation process for disagreements. We're rolling this out statewide. We have a statewide webinar training on the 1st on it. And this is an agreement structure that we can start to push and make available to other groups, which leads to my last point, data playbooks to create graceful starting points. As all of us go on our data journeys and building data resiliency, we shouldn't start from scratch, right? We need some graceful defaults that we can, of course, riff off and modify and make appropriate for our organizations, but we need that. And these are just 2 examples of ones that I've worked on in the past with a variety of partners, whether it's the release toolkit for open data or an ethics and algorithm toolkit around using AI. The last strategic goal is around boosting our drivers, our people, right? Our drivers and transit riders, as I like to say, right? And we have to ensure we have the capacity to use data well, right? And so one of the things that I'm seeing that, and we're doing a variety of things, but I want to focus on that related to data resiliency and the need to deepen our data bench in a very systematic way. And so when COVID struck and hit or grew, or I don't know what the right verbs are, and continues to be, we were scrambling to put things in place, right? And one of the things we had to do was pull in contractors or rely on a few individuals who really did a lot of work. And I want to contrast that with something that was happening in San Francisco through a program we had called Data Academy, where it was a citywide training program where we wanted to lift and level data competency across many different groups of people in many departments. And what that group had done after my well after I left this city was they had really developed a deep Power BI data bench. And so there had been extensive training where they'd done a push to train 500 plus people across 40 departments. And what that meant was that when COVID hit, they could rotate staff in and out. And they could easily transfer and handle because they all had that shared training and that shared set of tools. And I'm not into tool homogeneity, but there should be some core things that we can have in common. And importantly, there was a fostered network of folks who could, give tips and exchange ideas. Another thing we need to do around our people is we really need to clarify roles ahead of time and identify gaps, right? So, one of the challenges that I see across the state is really confusion. Everyone's like, oh, data is a technology problem. They can just fix it. And so we came up with this little analogy where, sure, IT is important, technology is important, but they maintain your gym, they can rent the space, they can make sure the equipment's there, but you need to have data teams as trainers who show you what are your targets, what are your trouble spots you want to target, how to use the equipment well, how to rotate in and out of cycles. But ultimately, business has to commit to getting in shape. And really, we want to change the language in the state to business is the key stewards of their data, and they are in the best position to know how to use it well. And so we need to boost their own capacity for using it well. And another example where I see a gap that we need to build out is what I call the truffle pig problem. So when I've worked to introduce data science to the business, we found the biggest blocker was our business not being able to identify good data science projects as a single barrier to adoption. You sort of know you have a truffle pig problem when you're always asked for dashboards. That's not data science. That's not machine learning. or build a data warehouse, or automate this process. These are all good things, but it shows a gap in competency around what our business needs to learn so that they can use our data well and our data systems well, and understand then ultimately why we need to invest in that data infrastructure. So we developed something called the project topology, where we gave them, instead of saying, oh, we're going to use an unsupervised learning algorithm. No, we didn't say that. We said, here's a business problem. Do you have business problems like that? So this is how it works. So one of ours was prioritize your backlog. And we'd say, you have a list of stuff that you normally handle first in, first out. How do you want to prioritize it, right? That's the business question. The data science, we just sort of model that and create groups using past and current cases. And then the service change is you sort of reshuffle based on priority, whether it's risk, opportunity, need, who knows. But the result is that departments are now addressing their high priority cases first. And we use this model to develop a variety of algorithms, one being for helping our assessor recorder process sales, property sales. And when you sell property, you have to decide, was that sale price the fair market value? And they did this all manually. We came up with an algorithm that allowed them to sort it into, yeah, these are probably good. Fair market price is probably the sales price. And these, it's a little off. Let's do a hand-by-hand inspection, right? So you can introduce this and relate these kinds of topologies to translate for the business. So data professionals, part of data resiliency is developing that translation so your business knows how to use you well. And there's more about this on our blog. We wrote a 5-part blog series on this. And in conclusion, I think the last piece is really about communities. And so we're working on Cal Data communities, really grow and expand our communities. And the community you have here is so important, and continuing to grow that and have the platforms and tools to exchange. In our case, we want to lift up excellent work. We want to acknowledge and celebrate it, and ultimately want to cultivate those relationships, because those relationships are at the heart of data resiliency. Last note, here's my 2-step plan to build data resilience is 1, get your data house in shape. Diagnose where you are. Are you level 1 data void, where you're just like, you can't answer basic questions? Are you at level 2, what I call data fire drills, where every question is you're scrambling around? What you want to do is you want to get to level 3, data on demand, so that then you can really unlock use of data in decision making. And it's not just about advanced analytics and ML, it's about evaluation experiments, it's about performance management, it's also about ongoing exploratory data analysis and data development. With that, thank you so much for having me. Sorry about all the technical difficulties, and my best wishes to all of you on your journey towards data resilience.
Thank you so much, Joy. That was such an interesting presentation, and we appreciate you being here with us today. I especially liked that part about having to commit to going to the gym, because I do feel that those of us who aren't data scientists are in that boat. We're going to have to commit to learning these things, and I think that's really valuable. So thank you so much.